So welcome back to the channel, and if you've been waiting for a real reason to get excited about Maul Shadow Lord, Sam Witwer may have just given it. In a recent Star Wars Insider interview, Witwer went deep on where Maul is psychologically in the new series, how he's changed since the Clone Wars, and why this version of the character sounds much more layered than a simple Maul is backstory. And because this is Sam Witwer talking, you know you're going to get a deep dive into Maul's mind. He's played Maul for years, and at this point he understands the character in a way very few people do. So when he starts describing Maul's mindset, it feels less like promotion and more like a genuine look into what this show is trying to do. According to Witwer, this series is giving us a Maul who is still ruthless and dangerous, but also more reflective, more strategic, and more unsettled than we've seen before. Witwer says that when the series begins, Maul is not entering the story from a position of confidence. He describes him as confused and a little apprehensive. That is a very interesting place to start, because we're used to Maul being intense, focused, and usually moving with absolute certainty. But here, according to Witwer, we pick up after the Clone Wars, with the Empire now in control, and Maul is reassessing everything. He says the Empire has taken over. There were plans in place that were supposed to insulate him from the changes when the Empire came to power, and that a lot of people that were supposed to be there for him were not. That already tells us a lot. Maul thought he'd prepared for this new era. He thought he'd built protection into his plans, but now the galaxy has shifted, his support system has fallen apart, and he's trying to regain control while the dust settles. Witwer continues with one of the most revealing descriptions in the whole interview. He says Maul is looking at the Empire, the thing he and Sidious were ultimately working towards, and asking himself what it all means now. And in Witwer's words, Maul is looking at it and thinking, is this what Palpatine had in mind, and how do I feel about this? That is a strong setup because it puts Maul in a position we don't usually get to see. He's not just pursuing revenge in a straight line, he's confronting the outcome of the system he helped build. And that leads into one of the biggest points from the interview, Maul's anger towards Palpatine. Witwer says very directly he's very angry at Palpatine. He says he understands now that that guy is the root of his suffering. In Shadow Lord, he sees it even clearer. Everywhere he looks in the Empire, he sees Palpatine's hand. That line is great because it shows Maul's anger is no longer just personal betrayal. It's bigger than that. He's seen Palpatine's influence everywhere in the structure of the Empire itself. Witwer also adds a fascinating psychological layer to this, and this is the kind of detail that makes the character feel much richer. He says if Maul's going to shake his fist at him, he has to believe he's somehow superior to Palpatine. If he's not, then he deserves everything that happened to him. That is brutal, and it tells us Maul is still driven by pride, ego, and survival. This is a dangerous person trying to hold himself together while facing the truth about what made him. And at the same time, Witwer makes it clear that Maul has not lost what makes him frightening. He's still the same ruthless, dangerous figure in the new show. If you cross him, you are done. So whatever introspection this series gives Maul, the threat is still there. Witwer also reveals that Maul is trying to build power again in the opening episodes. He says, in the opening episodes, you see him pulling strings, trying to build a new power base. That sounds exactly like the kind of Maul story a lot of fans wanted after the Clone Wars and Rebels, which had crime, influence, survival, and control in a galaxy that is rapidly hardening under Imperial rule. But the really interesting part is that Witwer says Maul is struggling with leadership itself. He explains that Maul has trouble delegating and doesn't trust easily. He's used to doing everything himself, which creates a tension between being the mastermind and being the one who steps in personally. That makes Maul feel less like a static villain and more like a broken warlord trying to become something else. One of the biggest clues to that evolution is Maul's relationship with Rook Kast, who Witwer says serves as his first lieutenant. And this is where the interview gets especially interesting, because Witwer says Maul actually listens to her. And that line matters because Maul listening to someone is not a small thing. Witwer goes on to explain why, saying he's learned that people have valuable points of view and that unlike Palpatine, he needs to hear bad news sometimes, so he's figuring out what it really means to be a Shadow Lord. That tells us this series may be doing something deeper than just showing Maul ruling with fear. It sounds like it's exploring whether Maul can actually become a leader in his own right, instead of just a weapon shaped by Sidious. Another major part of the interview is how Maul's defeat by Ahsoka in the Clone Wars Season 7 still affects him. Witwer points back to the Siege of Mandalore and says something a lot of fans have argued for years. Maul was telling the truth. He says he told the truth to Ahsoka about Palpatine's plans. Everything he said was true, and he was the only character who had a workable plan when the Empire was about to come to power. He just blew the pitch. That is such a sharp way to put it, but Maul understood what was coming, maybe better than almost anyone, but he couldn't communicate it in a way that Ahsoka could trust, and now it seems that failure has stayed with him. Witwer says this experience changed how Maul fights. He explains in this new series, he's learned to fight in other ways too. He's learning to use words, manipulation and persuasion. He's realizing there's responsibility behind every action. That's new territory for Maul. That quote to me is one of the strongest signals of what Shadow Lord might actually be. This may be less about lightsaber battles and more about power, influence, politics and consequences. A Maul story for a colder galaxy. Witwer even sums up the tone of the series with a line that sounds like a perfect pitch for this era of Star Wars. He says this show is bad guys versus worse guys, and Maul's on the bad guy side of that equation. Then there's the part of the interview that will probably surprise a lot of people, Maul's evolving perspective of the Jedi. Witwer explains that Maul was raised to hate and destroy the Jedi even without questioning it, but now after seeing what the Empire really is, Maul can at least recognise something he once ignored. The Jedi had principles. Witwer puts it this way: he was trained to hate and destroy the Jedi without even questioning it. Now he's looking at the galaxy going, boy, we could sure use a Jedi Knight or two. And that is a huge line, not because Maul is becoming a Jedi sympathizer, but because it shows how far the galaxy has fallen under the Empire. Maul of all people can now look at the Jedi and see that whatever his hatred for them, they stood for something. Witwer goes further and says at least with the Jedi, they knew where they stood. There's something to respect there. And then he contrasts that with the Empire in one of the best summaries of Imperial corruption I've heard from a Star Wars actor's interview. He says, this Empire, he sees no values there, just the naked grab for influence, power and money. Principles are gone. That is an excellent thematic hook for the show because it gives Maul a morally dark but intellectually revealing role. He is still a villain, but he's now in a position to judge the machine that created him. Witwer also adds there's no reasoning with the Empire. That line alone tells you how hopeless and brutal this period is meant to feel. Another major emotional thread in the interview is Savage Opress, and this sounds like it could be one of the most emotional parts of the show. He says he's exploring who he is, and also thinking about his brother Savage, his first apprentice and family. Then he follows that with a line that really stands out. Did he treat him as well as he should have, considering how loyal Savage was? No, but now he's finally assessing that and realizing I failed him. That is heavy, and it could add a side to Maul we rarely get to see in a sustained way. Regret that is not immediately turned into rage. If the show handles that properly, it could give Maul some of the strongest character material he's ever had. The behind the scenes comments are also very promising because Witwer makes it clear that this was not just a standard voice recording job. He reveals that he and the creative team developed new material beyond what was originally on the page. In his words, we built this subplot that wasn't in the scripts, and what came out of it is one of my favourite things we've ever done with this character. He then describes that subplot as strange, emotional and absolutely Star Wars. That is exactly the kind of comment that gets fans interested, because it suggests that they are not just recycling Maul, they could be pushing him into new territory. Witwer also shares a fascinating production detail that shows how much care is going into the performance. He said, we've tried things you wouldn't imagine, like me shooting reference footage for complex emotional scenes, so the animators see how my eyes and expressions worked. That is a very strong sign that Lucasfilm Animation is aiming for a more detailed and emotional performance style, especially for a character as intense and expressive as Maul. And then we get to Dave Filoni's mandate for the show, which may be the most important quote in the interview. Witwer says Dave Filoni gave us the mandate to do everything better: acting, script, story, cinematography and sound. He then adds, he told us to push everything further. That is the kind of direction you want to hear if you're hoping Shadow Lord is more than just another animated spin-off. It suggests the team is treating this like a major creative step forward, and Witwer closes with a line that would definitely raise expectations. He says we all wanted to make this the best thing we've ever done, and that is a bold claim, but after hearing how much thought is going into Maul's psychology, his relationship with Palpatine, his changing view of the Jedi, his guilt over Savage and the production team's push to elevate every part of this series, it does not sound like empty hype. It sounds like a show that understands Maul still has more to give as a character, and honestly, that may be the most exciting part of all, because the best Star Wars stories do not just bring a character back for recognition, they reveal something new that changes how you see everything that came before. If Maul Shadow Lord delivers on what Sam Witwer is describing here, this could end up being one of the most interesting character studies Star Wars animation has done. Maul Shadow Lord premieres on April the 6th on Disney+, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and for more Star Wars news, check out the video appearing on your screen right now.